Welcome to another episode of the Thunder Stock Show, a collection of valuable brainstorms to enhance your life, liberty, and pursuit of property. This is our EOS series about the EOS journey. Gary Leeman, your makeup looks great today. Pleasure to have you. Thanks for coming on.
Good morning, Ross. It's great to be here.
Gary, before we jump in, I want to know, what's the origin story? What was some of your early career decisions, steps that gave you a sense of the market and business that, helped you to get to where you're at today?
So, believe it or not, I think we have to start when I was in kindergarten. I grew up in a truck repair business. So my grandparents ran a successful truck repair business in New Jersey, which is where I grew up. And there were a couple of things that made me a little different as a youngster. One was the love of all things mechanical. Couldn't help but take everything I could get my hands on apart. I would drag home, discarded broken bicycles and lawnmowers and take them right to the garage after school and take them apart. And I was always mechanical. And I guess I got that from my grandfather, who ran the truck repair business. So as early as kindergarten, I was going to be a mechanical engineer. I just knew it, which is an odd thing for a kindergartner to say, because normally you want to be a fireman or an astronaut.
I was going to say, the fact that a kindergartner knew what a mechanical engineer was. I have a grandfather who was a mechanical engineer. I still didn't know what that was until high school.
It is an odd thing, and I used to get annoyed. They used to ask me, when I'd say I'd be an engineer, they would say, you want to drive trains? And I'd roll my eyes at 5, no, mechanical engineer, because I'm going to design and fix trucks, right? So it's just where I was. It was just, I never knew anything but. And because I had a love of all things mechanical, whenever I got a chance to visit my grandparents' shop, I loved going there, running around and just seeing everything, the welders, the brake presses, the drill presses, I spent time in the paint booth. So my early childhood was all about that. And it just seemed like my life was going to be, get enough school done, right, to get my papers, as you will, right, get my ticket punched, and then I could go work in the shop, is what we called it, the shop. So I just kind of went on this path. I just happened to be lucky enough to be good at math and science. So engineering was not crazy, although we would never have known that when I was a kindergartner. And so I ended up getting accepted to an engineering school. And just as I graduated high school, my grandmother, who had been running the company solo for a number of years because my grandfather passed away young, ended up selling the business. So she came home one day and told me she sold the business. And so I went from the one kind of kid in my circle of friends going into college, knowing exactly what I was going to do, exactly why I was going to do it, and exactly what I was going to do when I graduated, to being the most clueless of my friends. Like, what now? And I tell you, it put a big different perspective on going and getting my engineering degree, because I think when I knew I was going to do it, because it's what I was required to do to be able to join the business, that was kind of like, hey, if you want to do this, if you want to come in and join the family business, you're going to get your college education first. Since that reward, if you will, was not at the end, it really made me go, boy, what am I doing?
Did it take the wind out of your sails?
In a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, but there was I didn't have a plan B. And I went to a very, technical engineering college, right? It was actually an institute. It wasn't even a university or a college. And so there wasn't a whole lot of other options. It wasn't like I applied to Penn State and there were, maybe I could transfer to philosophy or transfer to art history. It was like, I could transfer to chemical engineering or electrical engineering, but I was going to be an engineer. So I don't regret getting an engineering degree, because it is a very good degree. It trained my brain how to think and solve problems. But when I graduated, I graduated in 91. There was a recession going on. And I just, throughout that summer, I looked for work and I ended up getting a job. And it was a great first job. It was with a medical products company. I had a great boss, one of the best bosses I ever had. And I went to work in medical products and just started that, career saying, all right, let's see how this plays out. About 6 months in, my first mentor, who was a very interesting guy, master's in engineering from Cornell. His dad was a nuclear sub admiral. His sister was Supreme Court Justice of New York. His brother was like a neurosurgeon. Like, this guy Mark used to joke that he was like the black sheep of his family because he only had a master's in engineering, from like an Ivy League school. And he also taught literature at night in a community college. He's a very interesting guy. He sat me down about 6 months into my first job. And he said, "Hey, Leeman, I got good news and bad news." So I was like, "All right, Mark."
News?
Yeah, what? No, I actually said, "What's the good news?" And he said, "Well, the good news is you're not an idiot."
That's good.
Yeah, I was like, "I'll take that. I'll take that from Mark. That's kind of like a compliment." And I said, "What's the bad news?" He said, "Well, the bad news is you're not an engineer."
What?
Yep. And he was right. I mean, he was right.
How is he right? That doesn't make any sense to me.
It makes a lot of sense. So in engineering school, you don't get many electives. You have to take so many core courses. You need like 100.
I had a roommate that was an engineer, and his course load compared to mine was brutal.
Yeah. And so just to get the credits, and if you're only going to take 5 classes a semester, I think we only got 5 electives in the 4 years. So 5 courses we could choose ourselves.
5 electives, that's it?
That's it. Everything else was prescribed. If you want a mechanical engineering degree, you're taking statics, you're taking dynamics, you're taking Calc 1, Calc 2, you're taking physics, Physics 2, quantum physics. It's just like, these are requirements. And so by the time you stack up each semester, there's not a lot of room left for anything interesting. But that's
Absolutely.
that there, and just me saying that anything interesting, right? That belies the fact that I'm not really an engineer at heart. Maybe I'm a mechanic, a designer, an inventor.
It could be a difference, I guess.
But engineers enjoy the challenge of like figuring out the math problem using the right theory and formula, and they're very focused on things, right? A reason that engineering and sciences generally skews male is because men tend to be more interested in things than people. Not everybody, but we have that tail. Right. Well, the engineers are in the tail of people who really are focused and fascinated on things. And I wouldn't say that I was the most social person in the world, but there's a C between the typical engineer who's very focused on all things technical and sees the world that way, and someone like me who I can do the math and science and figure out the engineering equation, but it's not a passion. It's not something that I just want to keep doing more of,
I have a couple quick iterations because I had really surrounded myself with engineers. I guess where I lived 1 year in the dorms was the engineering floor. I'm like, how the hell did I end up here? But I have a buddy that would be more interested in writing a dissertation as to why a 1997 Lexus LS400 is the ultimate vehicle of all time.
He's not wrong,
right? Like he would, that would be a paper for him. But anything with literature, he'd be like, this is worthless, crumbled up, thrown in the trash. And another buddy who decided to build a hot tub for his dorm because he thought it would be a great idea while he was moonshining, hooch in the dorm, nice, while he was trying to grow magic mushrooms. Like, not that easy. To me is an engineer.
Yes.
Right? As many building scientific projects just so that he could see if he did it. And you're saying you like to fix things, but maybe not, all of your focus around the stuff.
Yeah. And I have tendencies. Don't get me wrong. I have engineering tendencies. But what Mark, my mentor, was telling me was, look, I can be an engineer, but in my heart, right at my core, I'm not.
Does your Colby profile reflect that?
My Colby profile reflects that I'm schizophrenic. My Colby profile is really high fact finder, but also really high quick start.
Same.
So that's actually the engineer's profile, the entrepreneurial profile, right? So when you've got, not everybody has 2 high scores. So when you have like 2, I forget what the word is, significant influences, if you will, like when you're up a 7 or above, when you have 2 like that, then there's a whole secondary level for Colby. And it turns out that, a high fact finder, high quick start is an entrepreneurial profile. And why I call it schizophrenic is I'm always gathering information. I always
Yeah.
want to know more. Yet I always want to just go. I just jump in, I just jump in with both feet. I volunteer way, I get in over my head all the time, figuring like, well, I'll figure it out as I go. But I also, if I get interested in something, I'll gather enough information and I'll want to just start doing things. And that I have that fight inside. Well, you're not ready. You've got to get more information, but I've got such a compelling need to just take action.
So you're battling between impulsivity and analysis paralysis at all times.
All times. And so
Yeah.
what it sometimes appears to be is it does appear to be impulsive because the gathering of the information is internal. The action of taking action is very external. People see it, right? I come home one day and say, we got to sell the house. I've been studying the market for 6 months.
Yeah, it
Okay.
seems impulsive on the surface, but
Right.
it's like a duck. Like your feet are moving faster than the ground.
Yeah. So I've gathered all this information. I've done all this analysis. I'm not really sharing it with anybody. I'm not having these conversations. And then all of a sudden I just make this proclamation, like, we got to sell the house. And then it's like, well, what are you talking about? This comes out of nowhere. It's like, oh, no. It hasn't come out of nowhere. I've thought a lot about it. Just haven't maybe verbalized it. Right.
I have a quick look. If that's schizophrenic, then we're in the same boat, brother. Cut from the same cloth.
Joke about schizophrenia, but
I think it's funny. But I just told a couple people in my organization. I've got a couple employees. I was like, hey, changing prices. They're like, what? Again? And then it seems impulsive. But then I have 100 pages of research.
There you go.
Like I have a entire book. It could be a book length, like 10 different tabs between 3 to 10 pages within each tab that verify the point.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's like, yeah, high fact finding. I spent way too much time worrying about this for like 16, 20 hours.
Yep.
But I just like drop a bomb. It's probably kind of how I would assume you operate too.
Yep. I'll tell you a quick little funny story. So I've been playing with ChatGPT. I was resistant to it.
Of course.
I could probably tell you a dozen reasons why I was resisting it. Probably too long. I'll tell you what unlocked it. A great conversation. This amazing woman, Jen Cusano, I met. She said something that really unlocked it for me. She said, it's the way you prompt it. She's like, you think 2, 3, 4 levels deep all the time. So you're going to get different answers. In my mind, before I knew that and understood that, in my mind, I was like, well, then I'll just be a commodity. If I just go to ChatGPT and ask the question, I'll just say the same answer as everybody else would say. And it feels like cheating in one way. But
it is cheating.
Right?
It's a hack.
It's a hack.
It's a tool that, like, when people used to use horses to get from point A to point B, and then you have an airplane, like, airplanes are cheating.
100%. In that world of horses, it's cheating, but it's good kind of cheating. I had this kind of bias to, look, I'm going to give you what's in my brain. This is my value. And so if I just rely on this tool to give the answer, first of all, then I'd make myself replaceable, which I was not going to speed that along. Right. So I've got all these different thoughts. Again, high fact finder and an overthinker. So I did this funny thing. I started playing with it and I'm enjoying it. And there's a lot there, but it prompted me one day. It asked me, it freaked me out. It's like, would you like to know what I think about you? Yeah. Based on our chat so far, would you like to know what I think about you? And I was like, I don't know if I do want to know.
Well, I will tell you that, so you might not know this, but there's a temperature gauge on ChatGPT. I think it's from 1 to 10.
Okay.
1 being cold, which could be, I would assume, a New York City person on their rush hour way to work. It's like, get off my lawn, like, get out of here. You know, like a jerk, like very, purpose driven and whatever. And then 10 is like the fairy godmother, like the nicest, most kind, empathetic thing. Its default to 7, which is almost like a high school cheerleader, like a very positive, empathetic thing. So the biggest problem people have is they don't know that, like, ChatGPT's goal is to please you, like a puppy that wants positive affirmation. Its initial attempts are by nature biased towards being too nice and not critical.
That's
so
interesting.
For your information, I learned that not too long ago.
And can we adjust that setting?
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. And I wonder if it would naturally adjust downward as it starts to learn
You have to tell
me.
it.
Yeah.
You have to tell it to.
All right. Well, yeah. But I also understand I could upload a bunch of things so it understands my voice better.
That is more objective. So like
That's
the
right.
larger sample size of data, from what I understand,
Right.
the more it kind of has context. So anyway, continue.
So, all right. So the story. So it asks, and I was like, well, I'm sure. Let's see what happens. What harm? And it shot back this answer that kind of shocked me. It was oddly accurate. And now to your point, but kind of, I wouldn't say brown nosing, but it was probably, somewhat flattering. And then I said, all right, well, that's great, but that's flattering. What do you think I can work on? What are some areas I can improve? And one of the first things it says is basically stop overthinking everything. I was like, how does it know? It can tell based on my prompts, based on, well, that's good. Let's try it this way. Well, that's good. Let's try it this way. Well, I'm not quite, like most people maybe are like, I like it. Good. Copy, paste, and moving on. Right.
But a low fact finder is
a low fact finder. Right.
A low fact finder would say, write me a blog post for my storage unit business. Period. Send. And it would come out the most generic bull crap without any context, and it would just be like, he's like, oh great, it's done. Look,
it's done. Yeah, let's go. Let's publish and get on.
I'm like, I would have had 3 precursor prompts with a JSON file and have it do research on this and that, and my result would be probably 10 times better, but it would take 10 times as long. Well, in ChatGPT world, instead of taking 1 minute, taking 15 minutes, it's worth taking 15 minutes for it to be a really good output.
Yeah, taking 15 minutes versus 15 hours.
Yeah.
Right. It's still, the quality can be delivered if you're intentional about it and you care about quality. Mm-hmm. So I've gotten over the end of that long story is I've gotten over the ChatGPT hump, but that brings us back to Colby, which brings us back to, wait, you're not an engineer. What's your Colby? Which brings us back to, why did my mentor say I wasn't an engineer?
It makes sense now, though, Gary, because it seems like he wanted to be an engineer because of the family business. That seems like you mentioned that, and it's like it makes perfect sense.
And because it just seemed to be, since I was mechanically inclined, I could have been in a different world. I could have been a mechanic. In a different world, right now, I might run a auto repair shop or a hot rod shop, or I might be in a racing team. In an alternative world where I didn't have this early mission of like. There wasn't a doubt I was going to college when I was a kid. So you put 2 and 2 together. If college was not on the horizon, or if there was no, hey, you have to go to college before you join the family business, I probably wouldn't have. I probably just went right to the shop and been happy, right?
If my family didn't force it, I would probably, looking back, would not have gone to college.
Right. Which is, again, it doesn't mean I'm not a high fact finder. Again, we could do podcasts on podcasts of the value of college education in America today, and I worry about.
It's not what it used to be.
No, it's not. So what do I do with this information? So he says, you're not an engineer. And I literally, okay, so now what? And he handed me a letter. And it was essentially a life plan. He goes, it's all here. He handwrote it. He first was, you got to read these books because you don't have an education. You went to an institute to get a mechanical engineering degree, which is not an education. And in a certain way, he's right, because there really was no space for classical education. Right? I didn't study the philosophers. I didn't study, the Renaissance. And however, back to electives, one of the tells early on that I wasn't an engineer is when it was time to choose the electives, and people say, hey, Gary, what elective have you taken this, semester? I would say something like, I'm taking poetry. And they would look at me like I'm crazy. And I go, what are you taking? And they're like, well, we're going to take calculus 3. And I'm like,
why?
Yeah, why? You already did calc 1 and calc 2. Like, you have enough calculus. They're like, no, because of this, that, and the other. And I'm like, because they really actually were thinking when they graduated, they're going to do a lot of calculus at work. And I'm like, God, I hope I don't have to ever do another calculus equation in my life. Man. Right? So that's a tell, right? Maybe I'm not an engineer. So he gives me a reading list.
But poetry, like, I want to double tap on that. As someone who did study poetry in college, I think one of the things, like, I never took poetry classes assuming I would be a poet. I was like, how can I learn from people that made a living off of one of the hardest things to do ever? Right? Like, poetry could revolve around copywriting. To be honest, if you're interested in the opposite sex and in meeting women, there's 35 people in a class and I'm the only straight dude in there. Hello. Like, there's a lot of other benefits to taking poetry than just, oh, well, I don't want to be a poet, so why would I take poetry? Not the point.
I mean, look, beauty is all around us.
Of course.
Some people can look, at an F1 transmission and see the beauty in it. But some of the most, some of the most beautiful things that humans have created are sonnets and poems and songs. And so, uh, you know, poetry is just a way of appreciating everything that this gift of life is, if nothing else. Plus, just it's a mental break from more math. I mean, it's
Oh,
you
it's
go
a
down the
mental
list, there
break.
weren't a whole lot. I was like, I'd much rather learn to read a poem and excite a different part of the brain, right?
Right.
Because you can become very kind of one-sided. So I took, a management class, which is like a Harvard Business Review, and I loved it. I took a sculpture class. I took a painting class, and I took a philosophy class. I can't remember. I took sociology. But that was it. Those are my electives. Not a single one of them was more technical, right?
Yeah.
So that was
Sounds
a
like a
tell.
classic education as best you
Or
can get.
I tried to get one, but I still didn't have one. So Mark gave me this reading list, very interesting reading list, and a plan. He said, go work for 5 years and then get a company to pay for your MBA. And he goes, and then you'll figure it out.
Interesting.
So that was it. That was my mentor's plan for me since he knew I was an engineer. And again, I think he is absolutely right. I think if I were have not had that coaching, I probably would have found myself 10 years into being an engineer and not being very happy or satisfied.
Did you end up getting your MBA and following that
I
plan?
did. I followed that plan to a T. I read the books. The hardest one was Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon. Still don't think I can.
Oh, that's a good one. That's interesting.
It's
Yeah.
a big, thick, hard book. Madame Bovary was on the list. For Whom the Bell Tolls was on the list. Tropic of Cancer by Miller was on the list. Lolita by Nabokov was on the list.
Lolita. Okay.
Yeah, so like Mark's an interesting guy. And then I had moved to Seattle after a stint in Ireland. That's a whole other story we won't get into. And at the 5-year mark, I go and I take the GMATs, and I at that time the only place to go to school at night for an MBA was Seattle University. And so I was preparing to apply to Seattle University. I was working for a company that had tuition reimbursement, and I had approval to do it because I was going to go at night.
Yeah.
And that very year, University of Washington opened up an evening program. They had a top business school, Foster School of Business, as an undergrad or as a campus, full time. And they had an executive program. So they had an executive program, was like, every Saturday for like 2 years or something. You spent the whole day Saturday. But I didn't qualify for that because that was literally an executive MBA. And at the time, they meant it. Like, you had to be director or above in like a big company to even get there. So that wasn't open. But they opened up their evening program. And so I went to one of the, they had like an informational session at one of their big lecture halls, and it was packed. There's like over 1,000 people in there. It was such a pent up demand, right, for an evening program at UW that when I ended up applying, I think they had 45 places in that first class, and there was over just shy of 800 applications.
Whoa.
Yeah. So that class was really interesting. It was a very diverse class. That class was really interesting to be a part of. And the best part for me, this is the first time I took my education as something that I wanted to do to improve me, something I was interested in learning. And it was at night. And I was always a night owl. I was terrible in the morning. And so I would go to work and I would drive down for classes. Oh, and by the way, it was a quarter program. And they said, we want everybody in this first class to graduate on time. So they put a lot of pressure on us. And they said, you're going to stick with the program. You're going to take your 2 courses every quarter, and we're not taking a break. So once we start, you're going 4 quarters a year until we're done. So it was a commitment. So, you work, drove to school, class 1, class 2, start with the homework. Next day was more homework after work, and then class again and homework, and just this grind. But I loved it. I loved it. Like, I'm shocked that we don't teach economics in high school, right?
That
And
doesn't make
shocked
any
that you can get
sense.
an like you can literally graduate. I graduated with a degree from a 4-year institution, never had economics. And so really did open my eyes to a lot of things, really changed the way I viewed the world in a lot of ways. And Mark was right. And my passions definitely they lay in the business field, right? Organizational design and financial analysis and business planning and strategy. All of that was more interesting to me than fluid mechanics, right? Or, Moore's hardness of materials, linear algebra, right? No knock against any of those subjects, and God bless people who can do them well,
Yeah.
but it just was not intellectually stimulating like economics was, or like marketing. So I was still in medical products at the time, and I made a big shift to join Starbucks, and I got into a strategy group, and then just my
What'd you do at
career.
Starbucks?
Sorry, that.
What did you do when you were at Starbucks?
Oh, a bit of everything. I was a bit of a square peg in a round hole at Starbucks. Starbucks was obviously this phenomenal brand. From a company, they were amazing at marketing. They were amazing at brand. Howard created the third place. Howard was incredibly innovative. They had a very, very innovative culture. Um, but it was on one side, it was a very operational company because it had such a footprint. So if you were in external store operations, right, that was an incredibly important part of running Starbucks, right? So you had that kind of half of the company. And on the other half, it was, you know, brands. So you had the marketing, you had category, which was all the products. And then you had kind of like store design, right? The feel of the place. And if you were in either of those, and that's how your mind was, and that's what your career was, right? That those were the two like really important aspects of Starbucks. Everything else was kind of like a necessary evil, right? And look, every company can't be the best of everything, right? So Starbucks had to be good at logistics because of the nature of the beast, but it wasn't necessarily a logistics company, right?
I actually had a client that had a trucking logistics business that Starbucks was one of their major clients.
Yeah,
And he told me stories about how there was no days off, not Christmas, not Thanksgiving. And
yeah,
if you don't want to get the beans to the location, somebody else will, and you have one strike.
yeah. It was a behemoth, and it was fascinating, and I learned so much there in 10 years. I mean, talk about even though I wasn't going to be an engineer, I was still in an engineering field until I made that major change after the MBA. My last job as an engineer was I was actually director of R&D, which I loved. I loved research and development. Um, so I had a team of engineers working for me, but I could do that. I could have engineers report to me. I just don't make me do the math,
Mm-hmm.
right? Don't make me go figure out the fluid mechanics equation here to program, the flow simulator, right, to run the experiment. Like, oh gosh, no, right? But I could engage with that engineer and I could manage that engineer and provide, mentorship, but I couldn't do the math the engineer could do. Right. So where were we? We started this on how did I get to
It
my
was
life now?
Starbucks, and then you were at Starbucks for 10 years,
Yeah, Starbucks
and
for 10
you got
years.
some big business experience. But then at
Seattle.
some point, you moved from Seattle to
That's
Dallas,
right.
which
So
is a pretty
Seattle,
different world almost, right?
very.
Those areas.
Well, I went from Jersey, brief stint in Ireland, to Seattle for 20 years. And then I came to
Those are
Dallas.
all incredibly different
Very
places.
different. Very different.
It's not like you went from New Jersey to New York City, which is not that different.
Nope. Nope. And for different reasons, you make decisions, through life that make sense at the time. But I was at a point where I knew I needed to make a change, primarily, honestly, for my mental health. I mean, Seattle's weather got to me. Some people are very affected. I was one of those people who's affected by the lack of sunshine, the constant rain.
Well, Ireland's that way too, isn't it?
You know what? Ireland doesn't feel the same because Ireland, the weather changes constantly.
Mm.
And it's on, the Gulf Stream, I think, the way that while it can rain a ton in Ireland, you don't get a low cloud that settles in for 6 months straight, right? Plus, just there's something about the culture that makes it more livable when it isn't nice outside. Seattle can be kind of isolating. So,
Right.
they don't isolate in Ireland. They still go out. You still you'll go out and watch a Gaelic football match, even though it might be raining half the time, but everybody's out there, right? In Seattle, nobody's going to go out there. If you're not in the soccer league, then you're not going to play soccer in the rain. You're going to stay at home.
What was the jump to Dallas like?
The what?
The jump to Dallas when you moved
That
to
was
Dallas?
interesting. So my kids were young at the time, and Dallas is actually an amazing place to raise a family. So there were far more positives in the move. I had been living in a cave for 20 years without the sun. So like the very first order of business was to get out in the sun and get a tan and to feel it on my skin and to feel the warmth again. And I moved for a role that didn't work out. It was just one of those situations where all going to happen as you go through your career, right? It was a classic, change at the sea level. One day I'm in and one day I'm out. And so I was networking to find a role to replace it just freshly in Dallas. And I ended up just meeting this really interesting guy. We started talking about this concept. He was, working on a startup idea. So we were networking and I was fascinated. He was a cool guy. I was fascinated by the idea. So, we'd have coffee every couple of weeks and I would give him my input and we'd brainstorm a little. But I'm like, hey, I need to get a real job. And as I was interviewing for quote unquote real jobs at the time, him and his partner called me up like out of the blue and offered me a position. They said, look, we want you to be the chief operating officer because we don't know how to run a business. We need somebody who actually knows how to do something.
With an MBA.
So
Doesn't hurt.
it was one of those situations where, doing a startup, being, running my own business, if you will, doing that startup was something on my bucket list, something I always felt compelled to do. I had attempted twice while I was at Starbucks. I can admit this now. Nobody at Starbucks will get mad at me anymore, hopefully. Twice during my experience at Starbucks, I had gotten all the way to letter of intent to buy a company.
Oh, wow.
Because I knew I was not a corporate person. Even though I stayed in corporate for a long time, a lot of that was because my first child who was born had a significant medical condition. And so, look, pre-ACA, if you leave health insurance and you have a pre-existing condition, you were done, right? So it was kind of like when my older son was born, the only option would be to transfer to another corporate gig where I could transfer my insurance without interruption. There was no option of go on your own. There was no option of leave and get your own, health insurance.
Right.
It just wasn't available, honestly. And so that probably, that kept me in corporate roles longer than I would have. I was ready a few years after the MBA to go do something on my own, whether it was solo or start a company or buy a company or join a small place and build it with a team. It just wasn't an option. And so at the same time, I was thinking, well, it's not an option. I need to get the next corporate gig. And this startup opportunity comes, but it came with an executive agreement and the insurance was going to transfer. And by the way, now we already had ACA in place. And so the fear of a pre-existing condition, like, hey, if it doesn't work out, I can go and buy health insurance now and they won't exclude my son. And so everything lined up and I just said, sure, let's do it. And was everything you read about and more, everything I wanted, the fast pace, the being able to make decisions that directly impact the success, owning whether or not we're growing, constant problem solving, which I love, constant challenge and change. But it was also very challenging because as a startup without a proven idea in the marketplace and bootstrapping, by the way, we really found all those challenges. So after a brutal first couple of years, really, really difficult first couple of years, surviving month to month in a lot of ways, one of our early customers sold his company and he came to us and he appreciated that we were doing something different. He really saw value in our service. We did really good work for them. He believed in this kind of blue ocean space we were creating for ourselves that we were honestly not able to capture because we were a completely unfunded SaaS play. And you can't do it. You can't bootstrap a SaaS play, especially in a mature software market, which is why it pushed us into services. So we became a technology enabled service company, and we were crushing our little niche, but still had no marketing budget. So it was going to be a slow roll, and he wanted to invest. We were very excited because he was a great guy and successful guy, but he had a condition. We had to implement EOS, and we had never heard of it. So we were like, sure, Steve, sounds like a great idea. Whatever makes you happy, right? Mr. Moneybags, right? Steve is an amazing man. Steve is an amazing man.
That's
Steve,
an interesting condition. I've never heard that.
it was a
from an
condition.
investor.
It was a condition
That's
on
really
his
cool.
investment. And this is 2017. So this is when EOS was not a full franchise model. And there were still a lot of what we call base camp implementers. And so he
Yeah, it
brought
was a
with him
quarter of the
his
size
fractional.
then.
I'm sorry.
EOS was about a quarter of the size at that point.
Yeah, it was a lot smaller then. He turns out he had paid professional implementers on 3 of his businesses. So the business he had just sold, EOS,
So he knew.
he knew it. He
bought
knew it worked. He knew that it was what we needed. Right? It wasn't right. Our gap wasn't the idea, and it wasn't our passion to deliver that. It was all the other things that were broken because we were a startup. And so he brought with him EOS. He brought a fractional CFO who helped us implement. We kind of did a hybrid self-implementation, and I'm telling you, after my years in corporate, I'd heard the buzzwords, I'd seen the PowerPoints, I'd gone to the town halls, the kumbayas. I was like, hey, how bad could it be? So we'll do this new thing called EOS. There'll be some new buzzwords we throw around for a couple of weeks. It'll keep them happy.
Right.
And boy, was I wrong. It foundationally changed the way we ran the company. It was really my first experience since I graduated that I saw a system, a true management system, a system that effectively can drive a team and a company right to first stabilize and then solidify and then scale for growth. Right. It's all there, and it's not buzzwords, and it's not luck, and it's not the force of will by a new leader, right? Or hey, I've done this before in this industry, and so we're going to run my playbook again. That's a lot of what my experience was in corporate. This was no. If you start embracing the structure of EOS, there's almost no escaping it, and there's no way out. So it forces you to really look at the real data and be honest with yourself. It forced you to really talk about issues in an open and honest way to get to bottom, right? And we stopped throwing bombs in meetings. We stopped accusing. We stopped chasing, the squirrel and stuff. And it was amazing. So within a month, it was like my third education in a way, right? If I graduated as an engineer, a very analytical problem solver, then I went and got an MBA, classically trained in the ways of business. And now I got trained and educated in how to actually run and operate a business, which is different than business theory, right? And so
it's interesting. Around the same time I was going through EOS with it. It's actually around the same time as you, 2017, 2018. I was being told by people around me, oh, you just need to get your MBA. You need to get your MBA. Do it at night. You have time. And I started EOS, and I was looking at the programs at night, like you were saying. And I started doing EOS. I'm like, I'm going to put the MBA idea on the shelf until this is over. And kind of like you, I was like, well, I don't necessarily love school. School's fine. It's great. But I don't want to do school again because the same people, it's family and people close to me were telling me to do it.
Yeah.
It's like, I like EOS. This is going to be my MBA. And not saying anything wrong with MBA, not whatever, but I feel like, if you want to do corporate, bigger, MBA is table stakes. You got to do it. Right? Starbucks makes total sense. But if you want to do small business, I think EOS may have more applicability.
If you want to do small
My
business,
assumption.
yeah, I don't one of my clients, I don't disagree is a very weak statement. So I'm not going to say that. Steve, if you ever watch this, Steve Crowley, my buddy, if you ever watch this, thank you for that. Yeah, Steve called me out one day. I said, well, I don't disagree. And he stops me cold. He goes, yeah, but do you agree?
Yeah, do you agree?
And I'm like, you're right. That's weak. It's weak tea. So I agree. All education's great. I'm never going to.
In the right context.
Yes.
Like, studying poetry is great.
Right. But if you're, especially if you want to one day create your own company and grow it, you can't go wrong getting an MBA. You're going to learn a lot of important things. But is it, almost all the most successful business people that I've met who've built their own thing, not a lot of them have had an MBA.
Yeah.
There's a lot of corporate CEOs for Fortune 5. I think there's some insane number, like 30% of Fortune 500 CEOs actually have an engineering degree as their base degree.
That makes sense.
Yeah, because
actually,
you can do the math, you can do the science, you can problem solve, right? Process, and also just to get through that degree is a grind, and being a CEO is a grind. So there's a lot, but
yeah, and bug fixing, I think, is one. I talked to
bug fixing.
Like it's one thing to build a product, right? But then to troubleshoot and have the interest and follow through and desire to figure out why did it go wrong, and iterate and iterate and iterate infinitely to make the product better or system better. That to me is like an engineer gift that I'm not a big iterator. I like to build something and have somebody else like maintain and fix it. I get it.
Yep.
Do you think that, again, a Colby question, but that people with high fact find and high quick start like are moth to a flame when it comes to EOS?
I don't.
And then you have people that are maybe like high fact find but maybe lower quick start who's like MBA.
I don't know.
There probably isn't any research around it. It's just crazy.
Yeah, if we think about it. So when I think about how I've seen like EOS change lives, not only it changed my life, it changed the life of everyone who came through hoops when I was there for the 5 years I was there. My clients, other people I've met who've adopted it. I think the number one thing it does is it dispels the myth that, running a company, owning a company, trying to grow a company has to come with, 80-hour work weeks and constant stress and constant problems. We get in this mode of, it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy that, ownership of a company is a sacrifice. And of course it's going to be a grind, and it's going to be really hard work, and you're going to have to sacrifice time with your family, and it self-fulfills. So when there's constant problems coming in, when people are asking you to, fix everything and solve everything, and you've got to be on top of everything, you stop thinking there's a different way. You just go, well, this is how it's supposed to be. This is what they tell us. If you're going to own a company, it's going to be 24/7. You're going to think about it all the time. You need to worry about it all the time. Like, that comes with the job, but it doesn't. There is another way to do it. And so I think the number one thing I see EOS does is it helps people understand, no, there is a different way, right? Maybe instead of being constantly in a firefight mode, maybe we should just stop for a second and get down to the root cause of one of these issues and see if we can solve it at the root. Because almost all the time, the constant firefighting is lack of system in place, lack of training of the people, system being too complicated, lack of data and understanding. So as you start to strengthen these components, all of these problems that just seem to be that's life, no, these are symptoms, right? These are symptoms of the fact that you've got some root cause problems.
It seems like EOS could be a solution for a challenge that, when I asked you earlier, what's one challenge that you can solve and make a significant impact, is helping people to stop being so hard on themselves. And I think EOS in a way does that, because because when I hear, which I agree with, that the zeitgeist, the theory of business ownership is you're always on, 80 hours a week, it's a sacrifice. Like, that to me is just picture perfect of hard on yourself, right? But when you have, I think hard on yourself could just be like overcomplicating or not having clarity or not having simple tools at your disposal to take something complex and simplify it. Same conversation around ChatGPT being like I'm averse to it, but if you understand a couple prompt structures or how to prompt it better, then it's like it's no big deal, and it's sort of like synonymous with business, right? If you understand the tools of EOS, it doesn't have to be difficult. It is. That's not true. It doesn't have to be complicated. It will probably be still difficult, but at least you'll have the clarity in order to do the simple but difficult things.
I think that's well said. With EOS, or I should say it this way: there are a number of quotes that struck me over these last couple of years. Now that I do this like for a living, one of the quotes that really struck me was, "When decisions are hard, the vision's not clear." Right. So think about that. If you have a clear vision, if you know where you're going, it's not hard to not get off on that exit ramp. That's not the way to my destination. But every time a fork in the road comes, oh, what do we do? Well, your vision's not clear. If your vision's clear, you know whether you're going left or right at the fork in the road. And this happens daily. We get presented. Yeah. This is one of the things we really focus on in the vision, which is our core focus. Like, what do you do uniquely well? Who do you serve uniquely well? Where do you enjoy your work, and where are you profitable? That's your sweet spot. Stay there. Why are you going away from your sweet spot? Right? Why, Michael Jordan, why did you try and play baseball?
I had this conversation yesterday. It's so interesting. It's like people don't understand that these highest of high achievers have a singular focus. They just go a mile deep on that singular focus versus having a dozen focuses going like a foot deep.
Yeah. Your Bo Jacksons and your Deion Sanders are so rare. So rare.
Man, I don't know if you're spying on me, but I brought up Bo Jackson, Deion Sanders, Michael Jordan yesterday in the exact same.
I'm not spying on you. Chat is. I've got a chat bot sending me this info. I want to be prepared. So it's not, I don't like, let's not call it spying. Let's just saying, I was doing my due diligence for the call.
You're doing some high fact finding.
I
can tell you 10 on the high fact finding.
No, but right. So that's the magic of it. That's what I see it unlock, because it's simple. That's the other thing, deceptively.
So
I'll take a simple solution all day long, right? Simple's not easy.
How we're talking about clarity and we're talking about simplification, but how do you know now that you finally found your calling with EOS versus the career shifts that you had?
Yeah. But one, you probably sense the difference in energy and tone once I start talking EOS. Oh, right. I like telling stories. I went all over the place on you this morning about, poor kid from New Jersey in the wilds of River Edge, dragging, broken lawnmowers and all that. Right. I can go on and on, but
there was a lot of heartache and cloudy days, but now EOS is like sunshine, tan.
Well, I think and this maybe Mark saw this in me like this. I'm not an engineer. I don't know if this has anything to do with that, but like one of the things I enjoyed the most at corporate was mentoring and developing future leaders. Like, I take a lot of pride in anybody who wanted to help themselves. If you are growth minded, anybody before I got to EOS, if you were growth minded and you were interested in advancing yourself, your knowledge, your skills, whatever it was, if you're willing to put in the work, then I would be your advocate and your volunteer and help you. And I would get a lot of lift to see your success. That just filled me up. And so there's a huge part of that in the work I do today. I grew up in a family business. And while I thought for sure I was going to go into that, I have a soft spot for business owners, entrepreneurs, people who take these risks, because I know how hard it can be. And I saw it. I mean, I have memories of my grandfather, who was kind of getting semi-retired before he passed. And he would beg my grandmother to sell the company, like beg her to, like, come on, let's, it's been a long road. Like, let's sell, let's retire. And she didn't want to, but why would you want? You run a business, you're successful. He won New Jersey Businessman of the Year once.
Wow.
Yeah. New Jersey Small Businessman of the Year, which back in the day, New Jersey was, happening place, and that's a
I
big
mean, New
honor.
Jersey's the most densely populated state. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a lot of people there. It's a
This
lot
is
of
that's a
competition.
huge accolade, right? I still have this trophy here. So why would you want to sell? Like, you got this great life. It's like, no, because it's hard, because it was at 24/7. When I can, when I see that change in people, when I see people, their stress of the day to day, the constant worry, are we going to make payroll? Are we going to lose out to competition? Are we going to make our numbers? Are we going to be able to give bonuses out? Like, these are things that weigh heavy on an
Of
owner's
course.
mind, and it's so easy when you're not sitting in that seat to think that these people who own and run these businesses, have the life of Riley. They don't. Most of them don't. Most of them are, they would never admit it, but a lot of them are as paycheck to paycheck as the rest of us.
Oh, of course.
They don't, you don't think it, it's
The
impossible for you to.
ceiling is higher, but the floor is lower.
Exactly. And so, you know, the passion I have for it, one, it changed my life. When it changed, my startup was going to be a hard, slow burn because I'm stubborn. I was never going to give up. They were gonna have to grind me to pulp before I walked away, and it just flipped us into growth and success. When I see that same kind of, like, when I see those light bulbs go off in leadership teams, when I see the shoulders drop because I could see the breathing again, when I think about the impact I can have, how many lives you can touch at that level. Because if you take a leadership team, remember, each leader has people that are they're managing or reporting to, right? If they're stressed all the time, if they're at capacity, if they're at their own ceiling, are they able to invest in their people? Are they able to be present and kind and give opportunities for growth? Like, all these things become really, really hard to do when everybody's constantly worried about next week and next quarter. And so once you start to see that change, and you can see that it's a text, right? You change a leadership team, you up level a leadership team, you improve a leadership team's lives, then how many lives in a company get improved? And as you for sure this, that we're not consultants, right? I teach, I facilitate, I coach, and I want to move on. I want to get a team, and I want to have them master EOS, and then I want to say goodbye. Call me if you have questions, so I can go help somebody else, right? We want our clients to
To
graduate.
graduate.
We
Yeah.
want them to master, graduate, and go forth and prosper, so to speak. And that gives me then another opportunity to pull in another team and try the 10x move again. And so it's evergreen, right? For me now, the chance to get a positive impact on a team of individuals, it's this fountain that will never end, because I'll always have a room to bring another team on board. It's not, I get one chance to improve one company and have one story, right? And that's huge for me. I love that.
So, Gary, I have to ask you.
Yeah.
We're coming to the end of our time together. It's been a pleasure. At the end of each episode, I have to ask my previous guest, who you don't know who it was, and they did not know who you are.
Okay.
They ask a question
Yeah.
for you, and what the question is: what's the weirdest situation you found yourself in, and you've come out better than you thought?
What's the weirdest situation?
You found yourself in, and you come out better than you thought.
And I came out better than I thought. Oh, that's a good question. Let me think about that. All right, I'll tell you a funny story. My last job in medical products, I've had a couple funny titles throughout my career. That one was an interesting one. It was called Director of Technical Affairs. So in that role, essentially, I was the head of engineering for about $100 million medical products company. I just finished the MBA. So when I finished the MBA, I was promoted into that role from, like, engineering manager. So I had R&D for research development for medical products under me. I had all the specs, and because I had all the specifications for our products, I signed every engineering change notification. I had to file everything with the FDA along with regulatory, and I also had kind of a dotted line with our contract manufacturing. And so our biggest contract manufacturer was a Japanese company, and our business liaison, who had been managing that relationship for years, made a big kind of social faux pas in Tokyo the previous quarter. And let's put it this way: it was a big enough whoopsie that the owner of the company knew that he could not send this individual back. Essentially, this individual burned and put the relationship at risk. And this contract manufacturing company represented like 80% of everything we built and sold. So it was vital. It was the most important relationship. So my boss, who was the founder CEO of the company, tells me, "Hey, next week I'm sending you to Tokyo." Okay, David, what do you want? What do you want me to get done? He's like, you're going to go to the meetings with, I guess I could probably say the name, Tai Kawas, and that's it. What do you mean that's it? Like, is there a particular strategy you're working on? Do you need some decisions made? And he's like, and I'm a kid, really a kid at the time. I'm like 28 or 29. And he's like, no. You're just going to go. You're just going to go attend the meetings. I still don't understand. You're sending me there just to be in a meeting, but there's no decisions need to. I was like, do you want me to go see if we can get this, the problem solved with this wing? He's like, no, don't bring up any problems. Don't talk any engineering. You're just going to meetings. And I'm just completely confused by this. Okay. So what do you want me to get done then? Like, what's my job? Like, what's my mission? He goes, you just have to make them like you. Okay, great. So I knew a little bit about the Japanese culture at that time, and I went on this crash course because I'm literally getting on a flight to like Narita, like in like 5 days. And so, I prepare as best I can and make sure all of my business cards are in a row and they're all perfectly clean. And I practice taking a business card and, all the basic cultural tenets. And I find myself the first night at dinner at a shabu shabu restaurant in Tokyo, sitting across from the president of Kawasumi Labs with 8 of his people and me. And here comes shabu shabu. If you're familiar with shabu shabu, it's like hot pot. So they bring vegetables and this plates of Kobe out, and shabu shabu is you take the vegetables or the meat, and you with your chopstick and you dip it in this hot broth that's in the table, and it just flash boils, and then you eat it, and it's amazing. And every time you turn around, you look at your glass of Suntory whiskey. Every time you turn around, somebody's filled it up again. So you start losing concept of how much you're consuming, and you have no concept of how much you're consuming here. And I'm just trying to be liked. And what I understand at that point in the culture is one thing you never do is refuse an offer. Like if they say, would you like more? Would you like to try this? You go, yes, thank you. The one thing I failed to understand was that the way you let them know that you're done, so you don't have to refuse an offer, is don't finish everything on your plate. But between the whiskey and the really concentrating on wanting to be liked and doing everything right so that they'll like me. And by the way, they're encouraging it. Every time we order another
they want to see what your limit
round, there's like a cheer at the table, like they're impressed by how much I can eat. And so I'm like, I must be doing it well. And I kept going and I kept going and I kept going. I mean, these are plates of Kobe that are coming out. Finally, thankfully, Endo-san, which is like the highest person outside of the president sitting across me, very subtly leans over and he said, I think it was something like, Leeman-san, you do not have to eat that last piece. It was like, because he saw me trying to brace so I could finish what was on my plate, which just meant another plate was coming. I mean, I was bursting at the seams. So thankfully it ends, and I have way too much whiskey in me, way too much shabu shabu in me. I get up the next morning and I go, and I'm a little freaked out. Like I blew it. Like I made a fool of myself. Right. So I just kind of like, kept my head down, got through the day, and I got home and I was ready to apologize. And instead, I came home to like a hero's welcome, because apparently in their life, they've never seen anybody eat that much shabu shabu.
I mean, there's
a sumo wrestler has not eaten that much.
There's something to be said about applauding effort, right?
That's
like
what
they could tell. They could tell that this guy was either going to be liked or die from overconsumption. And I think that is such an interesting and like true thing for no matter what you do. Like if you have a singular mission, and that
I was on a mission, dude. I was on a mission.
I'm gonna throw up and become unconscious at this table, or you're gonna like me.
This table, I will not refuse a single thing they offer.
and they loved it.
Thankfully, right? They were very gracious. Again, I was a kid. I think if I did that,
Hey, if you were like 48
Yeah, I
and you
think
tried to
that it
drink
would have
that
been a
much
very different
whiskey,
situation.
that might have been worse. But I remember back at 27, I could drink a whole hell of a lot more than I can now without the consequences. So that was where
Yeah.
youth was on your side.
Yep. So it's
Now,
funny the way you learn things, right? So that's how I learned that you don't finish the plate. That's the polite thing to do. It took
I,
4 hours
you
of
know,
eating to learn that.
Pennsylvania Dutch country, it's an insult if you don't finish your plate. So that
This
would
is
have
the
been a tough
thing,
one for me.
right?
Like
This is
that's
the
the
thing.
yeah. So I probably would have done in your shoes. I get it. Like I totally get it. You don't
And
want to be rude,
no, you
but
don't
at
want to
the
be
same
rude.
time,
And you
so
need to study cultures because cultural
mhm.
differences are, you know, they're a lot deeper than you understand. So I encourage everybody to travel internationally for sure, at least once in your life.
Now Gary, I
If
have
you
to
can.
ask, what question do you have for the next guest? Not knowing who they are.
Oh man, that's such a great question. I'm going to top that. Okay, so I just shared one of the favorite articles that I read on when I became an implementer. One of the things that I really had to learn, a new skill I had to learn was, this concept of building my own book of business. So we can call it business development, you can call it sales, whatever you like. But
Mm-hmm.
as an implementer, an EOS is a foundational core value of ours. And our community shares it. It's amazing. The other implementers that I know, and I know hundreds of them. I mean, they share our core values, and it's really something when you get together a group of people who have the same core values. Like it's amazing. So we have this help first culture, and when you're really doing help first right, one, you have to show up filled up, which means you really have to be present for the person. If you're going to truly show up to help somebody, you have to be Phil yourself. You don't need any help, right? You're there to give, and you can stay in that purity. So there's this great article called High Intention, Low Attachment,
Mm-hmm.
which means you show up. My intention is to just learn, Ross, how I can be the best podcast guest for you, tell the best stories. I'd love somebody. Maybe the question would be, can you think of a time where the ability to let go of your desired outcome and just stay focused on what you wanted to do, your purpose or your mission, not trying to control the outcome, and what happened when you did that? Because I think it's magical when you truly are allowing God or life to unfold what's going to happen, and you're not trying to drive to an outcome. You're not trying to manipulate the outcome. You're showing up purely present. My job here is to be a great guest for you. And so if I focus on that and not about what I'm getting out of this podcast, how does that change the outcome? And I think it changes it dramatically, and in almost always in a great way when you meet people who are not about them and their outcome. So I'd love to hear a
Hey,
story about that.
I would, and a great story is if I knew a guy who maybe flew to Japan and drank way too much whiskey and sabu sabu, that I think is you're controlling the inputs. You're just doing your best, and it's a great question.
I was in that case though. No, I think in that case I was trying to drive the outcome. I was trying to make them like me. Maybe if I was a little more present with my own body. But no,
I think
yeah, this is this.
it's hard to do the more whiskey you drink.
That's
There
true
is no truth.
too. Yes, that's true too.
Well,
No excuse.
Gary, it's been a pleasure sharing stories and having this time with you. For everyone listening, thank you for following along. I don't run ads in the show. I don't plan to. So if you could do one thing, that would be to share the show with a friend. And last question, most important, Gary, how can people get a hold of you? How can people find you?
So I can share my contact information, but I have a LinkedIn profile, LinkedIn Gary Leeman, Gary.Leeman at eosworldwide.com. And I can't tell you what the URL is for my microsite, but I'm sure you could share those in the notes. Happy to follow up and talk to anybody who found this conversation interesting. And Ross, I know you do this fairly frequently, so I can't expect to be a guest anytime soon, but man, it was such a fun hour with you, and so let's make sure you and I continue to have these conversations, even if it's not recorded. This was really fun. I appreciate it.
Likewise. Thank you to everyone. and especially you, Gary. Until next time, be well.